There are these missing years from Jesus's life that I think only is really mentioned. I mean, they say he was just a carpenter from like 12 to 29.
Yeah.
It would make sense that, there is this individual, I wrote some of these notes down, Nicholas Notovich. He wrote the Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, published in 1894, kind of accounting his time in the East with some of these ancient Eastern wisdom traditions and their accounts of a prophet named Issa, who lived a very similar life, who described essentially exactly like who Jesus was in his life. That says, he went to, the account was that at 14 or 13, he kind of followed the trade route or the Silk Road or Silk Route that took him to Punjab. His fame quickly grew, went further south, lived among Jain devotees, went further east at Puri, welcomed by the Brahmin priests for 6 years, studying Hindu scriptures, then went north, staying with Buddhist monks, perfecting his knowledge of the sacred Pali language, remaining there for another 6 years before leaving the Himalayas, returning to Palestine, preaching along the way to abandon the worship of idols and to love thy neighbor. Also stopping in Persia, I believe, and got pushed out by the Zoroastrian priests.
He got pushed out everywhere he went.
Yeah. And it makes sense because Issa is the Arabic name of Yeshua. And I think it's only mentioned in the Gospel of Luke that says that, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man upon his arrival. But it's like, all right, what happened? Everything in between. And I just find it interesting with the overlap of the Essenes, the teachings. And so any words you have for the missing years of Jesus's life, and then further proof that Jesus was an Essene.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You sent me that video a couple of days ago, and I literally read the whole book on my flight over here. I couldn't stop. It was
Jesus
amazing.
in India is the video. We can link it below as well.
Yeah, and then it was The Hidden Life of Jesus by Notovich. The story is amazing. He's this Russian explorer who's going through Tibet, and he's talking to these lamas in Tibet, and they mention this character named Issa, who is from Israel, born into a poor family, and was this essentially a reincarnation of Buddha, they believed. And the Tibetan lamas document every great spiritual being that has ever lived in their tradition. And so they have scrolls that preserve the history of all these beings. And the one lama was telling him about it, and he said, "Do you have that scroll here?" And he's like, "We don't keep it here. It's in this other town. I forget the name. Starts with an L." And so he's like, "All right, I'm going there." And he goes there, talks to the head lama, has this amazing conversation. And the book's really well written too. It's like a beautiful journey. He describes every step of the journey and the people he encounters. But essentially the head lama says, well, we have hundreds of thousands of scrolls here, so it would take us quite a while to dig up that one. But he gives him the overview of it and says, next time you're in town, I'll find it for you. And he's like, dang, So he's going back to, I believe, India. And just as fate would have it, his horse hits a ditch, falls over, he breaks his leg, and he's only less than a half day's journey from the Tibetan monastery. And he's like, well, that's my best routes to go back there and heal up. So his servants take him back there, and they tell the Buddhist monks, they come out, very compassionate, bring him in, put a splint on his leg, put him in a nice bed. And he said he was in really excruciating agony, which you can imagine. Breaking a leg is like the worst form of pain, essentially, the body knows of. And so the head lama had compassion on him and was like, this poor guy, let me cheer him up. So he orders his Buddhist monks to dig up the scrolls of the hidden life of Issa, or the life of Issa. They bring it in, and he has a Tibetan translator there, and he reads him the scroll, and he says, do you mind if I write this down line by line? It's not a very long scroll. It's maybe probably 30 or 40 pages in total. And they said, of course, this knowledge belongs to all people. It's not just ours. You're welcome to translate it. So as his translator's reading it to him in English, he's writing it down line by line. And it's very cool because when you read it, it has that ancient energy to it and the way it's written. But yeah, it describes everywhere Jesus went. And it says essentially when he was 14, as the Essenes believed, you were supposed to be married and reproduce for the sake of keeping the faith going. And Issa, or Yeshua, didn't want to be married. And so he left Israel and traveled to the Silk Road and ends up going to, I believe, Tibet was the first place, or maybe India, I can't remember, but it's kind of funny because the exact same thing happens to him everywhere he goes that happened to him in Israel, in that he goes there and learns, teaches, gains a huge following, and then starts pointing out the hypocrisy of the priesthood in that area. And so with the Brahmins, their big thing was the creating of idols and teaching people to worship idols and all these different deities. And apparently the creating of these idols was very labor intensive, and they would make slaves do it and stuff. And so these slaves are working night and day to make all these idols for the millions of people that want to worship idols. And Jesus basically says to the Brahmins, you're practicing wickedness because the creator is invisible. He can't be represented in form. The creator's everywhere and everyone. And so you're worshiping a form in which the creator is not in, and harming the people in whom the creator really does live inside of to make it. You're total hypocrites. And so the Brahmins try to kill him, and he hears word of it from his followers. They're going to come kill you, bro. And he gets out of there and goes to, I believe, Syria next. Same thing happens there with the Zoroastrian priests. He calls them out for teaching sun worship. And he's like, who do you think makes the sun move? It's not the sun moving by itself. It's the creator moving the sun. And you're parsing God out into his creation and teaching that God is separate from you in these forms. And that's evil and wicked. And they try to kill him and he leaves. So you're like, yeah, that's pretty on par for what we see in the Gospels too, right? Of him calling out the Pharisees and Sadducees for the same kinds of hypocrisy. But in Israel, his main bone to pick was the animal sacrifices and the believing that killing innocents and shedding innocent blood could somehow atone for sins was insane to him, to the Essenes. And they were, strict vegetarians and all of that. So, I found it to be not only very on par with the Christ we see in the Gospels, but just a riveting book to read in itself.